It's a good day to brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? It's your boy Millsy, back with Hometown Commander, back for another episode of Millsy Updates, the show where I update you on my main and test decks. And today we're talking about another one of my favorite decks to play for a little bit of a different reason, as this one cares a little bit more about spells, and that's Ovika, Enigma, Goliath. The deck list is going to be down in the description for you below, so I'd really appreciate it if you could interact with the video, like, comment, subscribe, consider checking out those links in the description. I'd appreciate it. But Ovika is a deck that was my attempt to take all the things I love about spell slinging decks and all the things I love about tokens decks and try to mash them together. Ovika is a 7 mana 6/6 Phyrexian Nightmare. The ward is 3 mana and 3 life. And it says whenever you cast a non-creature spell, we make X 1/1 Phyrexian Gobos, where X is the mana value of that spell, and they get haste until end of turn. And the text "they get haste until end of turn" is what takes this deck from just printing tokens into being a real threat. Every spell you cast, whether you paid mana for it or not, which we do have ways to take advantage of that in this deck, right? Playing spells for free without paying their mana costs. These goblins are just going to come in. We're going to find ways to buff them. We're going to find ways to affect their damage. We're going to find ways to make more of them. The truth is, whether you swarm wide or you make 20 of them really tall, this deck tries to pack the punch with the tokens and back it up with some of the top end spells you'd expect. This deck is a 4, and it's rightly a 4. This is probably, in my opinion, the strongest deck I have in my deck box. It's meant to be that way. It uses extra turns and things like that, so that's not your thing. I completely understand. But we're playing things like Force of Will, Force of Negation, some of the high-end counter spells, and it's meant to sit in this range. The goal of the deck is get Ovika down and have a good time. In order to get Ovika down, we need to get to 7, right? At the end of the day, when you have a 7-mana commander, you got to get to 7. And in a color where you can't completely just land ramp, you need to find other ways to do it. And some of the best ways I've found to do it are playing things like Pirate's Pillage and Seize the Spoils that let you draw a couple cards and make a treasure or a couple treasures for the next turn to kind of get you over the hump to the next turn. Ideally, you're playing something like, Pirate's Pillage on turn 3, and then the next turn you're looking at 7 mana for Ovika, or Seize the Spoils on 2 or 3 to kind of work your way up towards 7. There's always the fun of playing Jeska's Will on turn 3 with 4 mana and having enough to Jeska's Will for 6 or 7 red, use a blue, and cast Ovika right after. The whole goal is to get her down as quickly as we can. Big score, unexpected windfall, kind of fulfill the same role. Draw a couple cards, get some treasures. We have to pitch a card for it, and it's okay that we have to pitch a card because we have ways to play things back out of the graveyard. The Arcane Signet's going to look dumb, but it's here to represent the fact that we want 2-mana rocks as much as possible to play them as early as we can to really get that extra mana every turn. I kind of view the 2-mana mana rocks in this deck like I do those ramp spells. Even if they don't produce a color, it's fine because we're trying to get to that 7. This time around, I just finally added Ruby Medallion because I realized I have a ton of red spells in the deck, and it reduces Ovika down to 6, so it is a little bit easier to get down. And then Rain at Riches is just like a really fun turn 4 play if we're a little bit ahead, or a turn 3 play if we're a little bit ahead. So it comes in and makes you 2 treasures. And then the first spell you cast each turn, that mana from a treasure was spent to cast it, has Cascade. And this is really fun because remember with Cascade, when you Cascade, you cast the thing without paying its mana cost. So if you do get into a non-creature, you can get it with Ovika. Now, if you use the Rain of Riches the first time to cast Ovika, right, Ovika will be on the stack, you won't get to get the goblins. But then every other time you try to use treasures, which the deck has some ways to make treasures, you'll then get to Cascade and get more spell casts off of your things. And once the gobbles are here, like we do have ways to use them for mana. One of the first ways I looked to try to do this in the deck was things like Sorcerer Class. But then I realized that Sorcerer Class only lets you tap them for the purposes of playing instants and sorceries. What if I want to play artifacts? What if I want to play enchantments? Well, now you have things like Skark Prospector and Phyrexian Altar that can sack those creatures to add mana that you can use for anything. This is also really nice at instant speed if you needed to do something on your opponent's turns. these cards don't care whether those goblins are untapped or tapped. You could still attack with them and then sack them for mana, right, to play other spells. There's a lot of interactions with how this works, but it's good to know you have this backbone in the deck if you need it. But all right, where this deck really shines is playing non-creature spells to get goblins. Remember, no matter the cost of the spell, you are getting non-creature, or you're getting goblins equal to its mana value. So the goal is to try to find spells that, even if they're a teeny bit expensive, just print you goblins and give you a high-end value. One of my favorite planeswalkers I found in the deck is Chandra's Hopespeaking. So you have a 6-mana planeswalker that whenever you cast an instant sorcery spell for the first time each turn, you just copy it, and you choose new targets to the copy. Now, you don't cast that copy, so I don't get the gobos off the copy, but remember that I can tuck her up 2 to get 2 extra mana in any combination of colors, which is nice. Or you can tick it up 1 to exile the top 5 cards of your deck and just play all the instants and sorceries out of them. So there's a lot of upside if it's not just the copy. Real Crackling Wit, right? Whenever we cast a non-creature spell, you put a loyalty counter on it. It's great for its -3 to draw you a couple of cards. It's great for its -10 to turn on Storm. But the truth is, it just hopefully could grow over a turn or two and really just get you that draw. The draw is key because, at a certain point in the deck, lands become irrelevant. 2-mana mana rocks become irrelevant most of the time. You're looking for the big haymakers. And the deck plays interesting spells, things like Call Forth the Tempest. The time I read this card, I knew this was an Ovika card. This is an 8-mana sorcery with double Cascade. So you resolve the Cascades first, right? Cascading into spells, casting them, getting more gobos. Remember that we've already got 8 gobos on the cast. And then when it deals damage to each creature your opponents control equal to the total mana value of other spells you cast this turn. So your double Cascade, you're looking at probably in this deck at minimum 5 or 6 damage. At maximum, you could be dealing 10 or 12. And then you're just lining the way for your goblins to get in for damage. And this is if you don't hit something absolutely huge off the Cascade. Things like Capture of Xing Zhao or some of the other extra turn spells we have. Renikiz's Vow Duplication can make a copy of Ovika, getting you double the number of goblins, right? But the spells that made me fall in love with this deck, and it, probably isn't gonna, it's not very strong, but is it fun, is something like Hit the Motherlode. A 7-mana sorcery lets you discover 10, and if you discover for something less than 10, you make treasures equal to the difference. So 7 goblins just on cast, and that's whether it gets countered or not. And then you discover 10, you're going to get goblins equal to that spell's mana value, if it's a non-creature spell, and then you might get treasures out of it. That's just a ton of fun. Is it the strongest thing you can do with the mana? No, but it just seems like a ton of fun. Of course, things like Time Warp. I have to admit, it took me a lot longer than I would like to admit to realize that Nanogene Conversion just could get really out of hand. So it says, choose a creature you control. Each other creature becomes a copy of that creature till turn, except it isn't legendary. Well, let's say I have a board of Ovika and 12 these Goblin tokens. You Nanogene, get 4 more on cast, choose Ovika. I now have 16 Ovikas, so that every now spell that I'm casting for the rest of the turn is just netting me that many goblins, even if it doesn't resolve. And I think that's the thing that you have to keep in mind with this deck is, sure, you could probably, counter the Nanogene Conversion, but the question is can I still do something with those 4 goblins if they come down and I have some of my buff spells out or have other things out? Past in Flames was, I'll admit, a card I put in way too late in this deck's life. It should have been there a lot sooner. Being able to flash spells back out of your graveyard, because there's just some gross things like Time Warp that don't exile itself that you could flash back out of your graveyard. Storm King's Thunder, one of my favorite copy spells, lets you copy the next instant or sorcery spell you cast X times, and you choose new targets for the copies. Again, think about the gross things you can do in here, extra turn spells. There's a lot of things in the deck that you can do with it. Transcendent Message has Convoke, allowing our goblins to help cast it, drawing us a bunch of cards, refilling our hands. And now, we think about something like Strixhaven Stadium. This is, I think, an artifact that a lot of people don't put too much stock in, but I've seen Strixhaven Stadium end an actual game multiple times. So it says whenever a creature we control deals combat damage to an opponent, we put a point counter on it. Then if it has 10 or more point counters on it, remove all of them and that player loses the game. I have in multiple games had enough Phyrexian Goblins hit all of my opponents that I've knocked all of them out with the Stadium in a turn. But the point is the Stadium most of the time is going to knock at least one person out, hopefully each turn, as you have all of these Goblins that are attacking with haste, right, and becoming real threats to your opponent. And just like any good combat deck, you knock the strongest opponent out first, and hopefully that's enough to propel you forward. But what I've always liked about Ovika is I am a spells deck first, but I'm a tokens deck second, and I can get into combat and do the things that normally spells decks can't do. This deck does do those things. It does present a threat in combat. It is going to bully you, as opposed to other spells decks that are just going to sit behind your counter spells. And in this section, now we're talking about how do we actively buff the goblins? How do we actively make them better? Well, we have things like Isengard Unleashed. Damage can't be prevented this turn, and if a source we control would deal damage to an opponent or permanent they control, it's tripled this turn. So remember, we're adding 5 goblins on it. All those become tripled. So if they're not getting buffed, they're just hitting for 3 damage. But if they're getting any sort of buff, right, now they're hitting even harder. Kindred Charge, chooses a creature type and just gets one for each of them. So we just pick Phyrexian, right? Get everything, and we'll probably copy Ovika, right? And it'll die, but no big deal. The point is you're doubling the amount of goblins you have. And remember, you get 6 from the charge before it resolves, meaning you're getting what you have plus 6 doubled, right? Banner of Kinship, I've only seen it once so far in the deck, and it was 10 plus. Just come in, and then you have that buff for every goblin that comes down while that banner's out. I think I like Banner in a sense in this deck a little more than I like Coat of Arms, because most of the time I'm getting Banner out at a really good time. Remember that Banner at minimum, if you just had Ovika and no other Phyrexian goblins out, you're casting Banner for 5, you're getting 5 goblins off the cast, and it's coming in with 6 counters on it. Minimum. That's if you only had Ovika and the mana to cast this. If you have any other goblins, it's very easy for Banner to come in for 10, 12, plus, and just make your board a real threat for the rest of the game. There's Coat of Arms. There's no reason not to play Coat of Arms. Again, a board of even Ovika plus 5 goblins, right, is a +5/+5 for everybody. Now you have 6 6s instead of 1/1s that are becoming real threats, and it just gets worse the more you add to the board. Eldrazi Monument helps you just get in the air and give them indestructible. This is really nice just to help continue to protect Ovika just that little bit more. Ovika doesn't have indestructible, right? So it's probably the easiest way to take it out. Remember that all your single target removal, it's 3 mana and 3 life, right? Is helpful unless you have things that aren't counterable. But the truth is, it'll be very easy to sacrifice a creature every turn to keep Eldrazi Monument amount, and just getting all those Phyrexian goblins in the air could be the difference between ending a game. Heraldic Banner coming down, choosing red so that all of our red creatures get +1/+0. Again, buffing all of those goblins for us. Patchwork Banner choosing Phyrexian not only buffs all of our goblins, but buffs Ovika as well, giving that nice buff for us. City on Fire was a card that went into the deck pretty easily as soon as I kind of brewed it when March of the Machine came out. When March of the Machine came out, it came in pretty easy. Everything just triples the damage. And you can convoke it out, meaning the goblins can help tap to get it out. And remember that when you cast it, you get 8 goblins. So you don't mind tapping the goblins for it, because you get more back as soon as you cast it. Shared Animosity, right? Giving that great attack buff when they attack. It's things like this that make this deck really scary, because you may say, oh, they're all 1/1s. Well, no, I attack with 15 of them, and now they're all 14s or 15 ones, and you could start to see where this can get potentially out of hand. And you have to talk about it that way, because I think it's easy to say, well, it's just Magical Christmas Land. But the truth is, in a lot of games, you can deploy these things at the right time, right, just to really hurt your opponents. We talked about the Ruby Medallion. Probably should have come in sooner than it did, but it was one of the more recent cards I added. I added Whir of Invention. It may look odd, but the truth is there's a lot of great artifacts like Coat of Arms and Banner of Kinship and Eldrazi Monument and things like that are just really crucial at the right times. Think about it. If I have only a Whir of Invention in hand and I had 8 mana, I can go get a Coat of Arms, and I could potentially end a game, because that's 8 goblins off the cast of the Whir Invention, and then the Coat of Arms comes down, right? Just think about it. Think about all the scenarios that Whir of Invention could go get the right artifact at the right time. And then Full Throttle. The second I read Full Throttle, I knew I needed to try it. After this main phase, there's 2 additional combats, and you untap all creatures that attack this turn at the beginning of each of those combats. You're netting 6 goblins on the cast, and then just take off. And again, any amounts of buffs make Full Throttle a huge, huge threat to your opponents. But I'll say it on the show, and I'll say it on the show again and again. No deck's ever complete. These are my more recent adds to Ovika, and I still think I'm learning more in testing. Now, between the time I made the PowerPoint for this episode and I actually made the changes to my personal deck, I actually ended up adding Force and Negation back in. I had a proxy at one, so I threw it in there. So it's actually been added back in, as well as I think Mystical Tutor went in as well. But there's cards like Pyromancer's Goggles that I've always thought about. You get a red and you copy a spell and you cast it. I mean, you're getting 5 goblins off the goggles. Like, it feels worth it. The problem is I have a hard time giving it a slot over a 2 or 3 mana rock that could potentially help us, right? Get Ovika down a turn sooner. Again, I love Bria. I love this card. I love the idea of this card. The goblins growing with prowess and then making Ovika unblockable seems really helpful, right? But I just can't find the slot for it. The truth is, I think the deck needs a certain amount of each of the things to like really take advantage of what it's trying to do, and it's hard to kind of find that rhythm to break. In fact, I've even thought about taking a creature like Balmor that's in the deck and take it out. Even though I love it and it gives trample, the truth is, like, I kind of wonder sometimes, is it worth it just playing another draw spell or another mana rock or another dig spell over the Balmor, because in more scenarios does it lead us to digging into more? I know those are the existential questions that some people don't like to ask, but as a brewer and as a tinkerer, those are the questions I like to ask. How do I make a deck more optimized? Because the truth is, if you're in bracket 4, that's what you're doing, right? In bracket 3, it's more about you can still play themes, but you're just playing better cards in those themes, right? In bracket 4, you have no reason not to optimize. And so that's kind of been the philosophy difference to me with Ovika, even before the brackets existed, was this is a deck that I'm trying to push up as high as I can. This is not a CDH deck by any means. I'm not playing the staples. I'm not playing enough fast mana to make it a reality. I'm not playing I never played Crypt in the deck even when it was legal, but I'm not chasing that high-end mana. So this was never intended to be a CDH deck, but it is intended to be a very strong deck. And I'll be honest, the matchups that this deck tends to lose are the matchups into others, is it spells decks, other combo decks. The truth is, it's hard sometimes to stop one of Mikey's favorites as of late, to stop a Stella Lee from comboing if you don't have a counterspell at the right time. That's just Commander, right? As you get up into higher levels. But I love this deck. I think I'm going to love this deck for a long time, and I've had a ton of fun iterating it. But let's get into our playtest. Remember, the goal of the playtest is not to find magical Christmas land. It's to have some fun determining what our plays are going to be and seeing how it unfolds in front of us. Here we're keeping a 3-lander with the Seize the Spoils and the Pirate's Pillage. I think this is a good start to getting Ovika down a little bit early. We've got Chandra, we've got the Whir. We're a little bit far off the Whir at the moment for having triple blue. But again, I like this hand because ideally you could seize on 3 and pillage on 4 to go turn 5 Ovika at worst. But I mean, we will see what we get. Turn 1, we'll get that Steam Vents and tapped. Again, nothing quite you can do with it. Now turn 2, we see the Patchwork Banner, which there's the question of which is more worth it on turn 3, to get the Seize the Spoils or to get the Patchwork. I kind of like the Seize, at least at the moment, because you get the access to dig into extra things. I mean, we still get the treasure for next turn, but the truth is, we could dig into something else. But I think the argument's perfectly fine, because we could Patchwork this turn and then still draw in Pirate's Pillage next turn, and Pirate's Pillage on turn 4 would get us right into Ovika for turn 5. So there's choices. The question is, would you rather dig, right, or would you rather go for it? We'll go with the Patchwork Banner this route just to see how it works out. So here, turn 4, we play the Pirate's Pillage. I'll pitch the Seize the Spoils to draw 2 and make 2 treasures. Now we have Ovika guaranteed next turn. We have some other ways to draw. There's Impact Tremors, right, to get some damage when the Goblins come down. And now on turn 5, we actually kind of lucked out. So we'll pay the 7 for Ovika, and then I'll just pay the 1 for off the banner for the Soul Ring, just to get a Goblin this turn. That could attack if we wanted to as a 2/2. But the truth is, now we're in great shape. Again, Ovika is just very difficult to get rid of, especially this early in the game, because it's probably going to take someone's entire turn to do it. And if they do, that's fine with me. We can set up some more and play it again later. we do now have enough mana to replay it next turn if we had to, as long as we draw a land. But the truth is, now we're just fine because we can play other pieces down. So if she does survive to our next turn, now we're looking to dump as much value down on the board as possible to get not only as many goblins as we can, but to get as much value. So we're looking at 8 mana. I love the idea like Chandra. I just don't really have any spells. Let's think about this. If I Chandra, that gets me 6 goblins. I'm just going to use a counters on them to count the goblins because we're going to be getting a absurdly large amount of goblins. My thought here is Battle Hymn. Battle Hymn's going to get copied because of Chandra, so I'm going to get 2 right off of the initial cast, right? So I'm going to net 9 red and then 9 red, right? Because the same amount of creatures each time. But there you go. There's the copy. So I'm netting 18 red. I'll tick her up 2 just to grab a couple blue, right? Just in case I need them. Impact Tremors, 2 more goblins, 2 damage to everybody. I can pay 6 for the bombardment, 6 more. Again, remember these all come in with haste, bunch more damage off the tremors. And then I didn't use any of the blue. I had 18 and 2, so 20. I've only used 8, so I've got 12. Go whir for coat, I guess, and as long as no one can counter it. Bombardment doesn't go off this turn because I already played the Battle Hymn. But I'll just try to whir for the coat. And the fact is, I can put anything in. I'll put the entirety of the mana I have into it. So if I only spent 8, that means I have 12 left. I'll put all 9 into the X, make 12 more goblins, right? So even if somebody counters this spell, I've still got 29 goblins that can attack this turn. 29 2/2s because the Patchwork Banner. And again, go get coat. Or if we know it's going to resolve, heck, we could just go get something like Eldrazi Monument instead. If people have enough gumming up the board. Okay, now they're all 3/3s in the air, and that should present, even enough damage, right? You'd need what? At full health, you'd need 13 apiece for your opponents. So I can't knock out everybody, but I could knock out, 2 of them for sure. Of course, with the coat, you could knock out just everybody, right? Because now these are all 30/30s, 29 30/30s, right? And again, a little bit of the Christmas land draw here, but the truth is that's what the deck's designed to do. And unless somebody counterspells at the right time, right, we're coming out ahead. Here we're keeping a 4-lander with the Talisman and a Midnight Clock. So we've got our way up to 7. We've got the Kindred Charge, and I like this hand a ton. The 3-Tree City is going to be great later, right, when we can start tapping it for red for each of the Phyrexians. Thought Vessel on turn 1, again, great. Now we've got lots of mana. We see Nexus Fate, one of our many extra turn spells we have in the deck. The nice part about Nexus Fate is that it shuffles itself back into our library after we cast it, so it can be found again later. Here I'm thinking, Midnight Clock for these 3 into the Talisman. So now we're at 6, the 3-Tree City 7 for Ovika next turn. And now, right, as we go around, Midnight Clock's going to eventually, in a turn or 2 from now, shuffle everything back in and give us a fresh new hand. So we can kind of build, right? If we go Ovika this turn, on our next turn, this is going to be up to 8. Right, so we kind of know this turn if we don't play something, it's going to get back into our library. Invasion of Segovia is great, because remember on the backside, it becomes a creature that allows all of our creatures to tap to convoke non-creature spells, which is kind of nice. Here I'm thinking Heraldic Banner for red, make the 3 goblins, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 mana left. I like the spoils. I guess, it kind of doesn't really particularly matter because even if I pitch something, it's just going to get shuffled back in. So I'll try it. I've got 2 mana left. I'll pitch the Segovia, draw 2, and get a treasure. Up to 3 mana. 3 from 3 from casting it. Yeah, 3 mana. I could Battle Him. Would get me enough to... I don't think it would get me enough to play Nexus Fate, but I could Kindred Charge, make a couple more goblins, take a big attack this turn, I guess. We're a little early for that attack to be pretty lethal, but again, either way, it's just going to get shuffled back in, but the goblins won't. So I think that makes the most sense. Battle him. I get 2 more. I've got 1, ideally blue left. Go to add 8, 9 red. So I've got 10, one of it being red. So play that for 4. Play the Kindred Charge for 6, netting the 6 tokens. Then I get extra copies of them just for this turn. And then, well, we could be in good shape. Do we Mizzix back the Kindred Charge, making 29? Sorry, this would have been 15 because Ovika will count. Or yeah, so no, sorry, Ovika, the copy of Ovika would remove itself. I guess, yeah, you go Mizzix Mastery for Kindred Charge, I think would be my thought here. I'm now making 28 goblins. I've got, 56 of them now? Potentially knocking at least one person out, maybe 2, depending on the board state. And then on our turn, all this shuffles back in. We draw a fresh 7, and I think we're just in great shape. Again, a little bit Christmas landy with a nice turn 5 where we assume that nobody has removal. But again, that's what we need to do for these playtests to understand what our lines are, right? 4-lander here with Strixhaven Stadium, Arcane Signet, big score. Again, these are the type of hands we want to see. Something to do on turn 2, something to do on turn 3. Setting the Signet there. And then here, I think we actually just want a big score, right? Thinking a land. Draw 2, make 2 treasures, right? Because now, on our next turn, 4, 5, right? 6, 7 for Ovika. So here's a turn 4 Ovika, ready to go. So that now on turn 5, right, we start getting things down. Stadium for 3. And now I've got 4 mana, so a little bit outside of our, Eldrazi Monument range, but we could just go ahead and Prismari Command if we want to. We can make a treasure and draw 2, pitch 2, would be my thought. So let's see what we draw. We draw Force of Will and Word of Invention. Well, Force of Will seems great in this hand, considering we have a handful of blue cards. I like the message to draw, but again, Word of Invention feels great to go get something like Coat of Arms, right? For the purposes of just like getting something that's really going to help us in the game. So I'm thinking the message and 1, 2, 3 blue sources. And we netted the treasure and then, 3 more goblins. And I think we're in great shape there. And then on our next turn, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 mana, and we got 3 of it as blue. We could just go and whir. I mean, whirring for a coat of arms would certainly do it, probably. Netting, I put the whole thing into it, which is 6, netting 9 goblins. They're all huge. That's an option. I could delay it a turn. I could do something like temporal manipulation, get 5 this turn, and I've got 4 mana left. I could do that, take an attack, and then do the coat next turn. Maybe I'd try my best to see if I can take somebody out this turn with something like Strixhaven Stadium. There's a decent amount of lines from this point. You've got the protection from the force with the whir. If I whir, I hold this up to pitch to the Force of Will. And again, even the monument's not bad either. I just can't monument and like whir. I'd have to kind of choose my battles here. But again, just goes to show you the explosiveness of Ovika in the right tables at the right time. But I'd love to know, what do you think of Ovika? Am I crazy? Am I dreaming? Is it brutal? Is it not? I love this deck. My playgroup's grown to love and hate this deck. And it's a deck that just brings me a ton of joy to play. So thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you all in the next one.